That's where you need to be unified in principle or in purpose. Um, that would be, let's say, the sixth ray component, the devotion to the principle. It's the same thing with a relationship when people get together and like, oh, we grew apart or whatever. But the relationships that stay on and keep evolving and growing together are often people that have a sense of shared spiritual purpose, or they have a sense of shared values, or like the religious couple that has Christ at the center of the relationship, which is in metaphysical language, the soul at the center of really the God principle at the center of a relationship. Because if you have the transcendent function, then that's something that the lower nature has to bend to in order to serve that. And that's a sixth ray process. Like when people say, I surrendered it to God and now I follow God's will. So that's like the step one. That's just another way to elaborate on what you were describing there with being oriented towards service. And is the consciousness there as the priority? Because that will necessarily inform how other questions get answered. Like, let's say the more seventh ray question of, okay, but what about the practicals? What about the financing? Because yes, they're two different questions, but you have to work out where's that point of unification. Because if we're just orienting from money, then we can go into a third ray glamour, which would just be about efficiency and process. And then you lose the love component, or you lose the underlying principle or something like that. And so yeah, and
I see what's happening.
because
Yeah.
if you don't have the love at the center or that principle, then the moment that the issues come up, the projections, like the power problems, the normal human messiness, which is just a part of
Yeah.
being in
Every
existence.
day. Yeah.
But if there isn't an equal dedication to that centralizing principle, then the selfishness can just take over. Because if someone ends up being selfish, and then you can actually say to them, hey, is this act like that? That becomes the inner guiding principle. That's the God following God's will, or living life by the soul. And so that's why I ended up marrying my husband, because when we got together, I knew from someone had shared he was writing poetry at the time. He was in his Leo Neptune, sunveiling Neptune phase, and he was writing mystical poetry. And people were like giving it lots of love on Facebook or whatever, and people were sharing it. I could tell that people weren't really getting actually just the depth of what he was communicating there. But I read one poem of his, and I knew that this was a person who would do whatever it took to follow that love principle. I just knew. And that's something that can't be faked. There can be people who say that they're about love and say that, da, da, da. But he really just had that transmission, and that was it. I was like, because that's actually, I knew what I wanted at that point, and I wanted someone who was going to be able to do whatever it took in order to follow that love principle, no matter what it required to be sacrificed or what challenges had to be overcome. That was going to be the priority. And that became the foundation, because if we didn't have that, then the moment that the conflicts got bad, it's like, all right, well, see ya. And sometimes that has to happen in relationships, because you realize that the relationship was based on just the projection. And when you withdraw the projection, you go, oh, there's no real relationship here. Um, and so that transcendent principle, it's like that which goes beyond the human being. And so then when you have the conflicts of the Maya, which is the human personality, because ultimately it is illusion, then you at least have this transpersonal background with which enables you to have enough devotion and commitment. I mean, that's what commitment is, to stick with it, um, and then it becomes quite simple, just like, what is the deepest expression of love here? And that, like, when you really ask that, I mean, it mutes a lot of the bullshit, because then you go, okay, well, when I really compare what I'm thinking or saying or what I'm expecting to that,
Yeah.
it becomes very clear what's selfish or what's unreasonable, or at least, it brings that question into the table where you can actually have a bit more flexibility around things. And so I guess the question then becomes, what happens when that goes on in a group? And if we can start from the outset in acknowledging that part of deepening the human being and bringing a greater wholeness and integrity to the human personality going through these conflicts. And if we know enough and can relate to each other in a way where we stick with it, if there is at least an trust enough in the principle of the person. Because I can tell you, because I had the transference with my own analyst, and it happened 9 months in, which was actually pretty quick for it to happen. Which made sense though, because I was doing this immense emotional work anyway, and it's like every day for me, which isn't necessarily a given for anyone who goes into analysis. But I had my own negative mother complex come up onto her. And even though I knew everything that I've just been talking about, and I had that, and I had gone through all that experience with my husband, I was still, when I was in that projection, I was like really contemplating ending my analysis with her. Like, I know, like, I was really sitting in that because what came up was so, like, this is the thing with some of these archetypal things. Our complexes run so deep and they hit places of pain in us that are like so foundational to our entire personality structures. And when these things come up, it can be really fucking intense. And it's just shattering. Like it cracks open our deepest pains. And it requires a lot of tenderness and like I had to like disconnect, not disconnect, but I had to just separate myself from what I was experiencing in that moment and go, hold on, like, do I trust the integrity of my analyst? Yes. Do I think it's important that I continue with my analysis? Yes. But I really had to like sit in that, which was quite confronting because at some level, like, well, of course I know that. But I was seriously contemplating leaving my analysis. And it was a funny thing because as an analyst, she experiences this a lot where people get to this point and that's when they break analysis. And she's like, this is like where you want to get to in the analysis. Like because that's where you get to those really deep places that when you transform, you liberate so much energy. And so, but because she has experienced that so often where people end up leaving the analysis at that point, she kind of came at me quite hard. She was like, Risa. And of course, I was in my activation. So that was like, no, like her being harsh with me was like activating me in my mother wound. So I was like, ah. But that's just the messiness, right? Because ultimately she's a human and is as wise and brilliant as she is, it's not like she's going to perfectly be able to handle every conflicting situation with the perfect grace or exactly what would be the perfect thing to say to me with my particular things in that moment. Um, and once I was able to just get over the hump of that, it was fine. Like we just continued the analysis. And again, I've gone through this process of withdrawing projections a lot anyway, so I was able to just kind of like shake it off, and we kept going, and it was fine, and there was no issues. But my point is that the transference is bound to happen at some point. Whenever intimacy gets ready to deepen, that's where because the deepening of the intimacy is like grounding into deeper levels of love. When you do that, you hit on those places that haven't been touched by love. And that gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So you hit more and more painful places. So, I mean, I've just been talking about that for quite a while, but I think it's worth spending time on because I really have a lot of um, apprehensiveness, perhaps, about this as an inevitability. And I think it's just important to, from the outset, bring it into consciousness because if everyone has that awareness as a background, then when something does come up, or if someone starts to like, for me with my analyst, I had a little like awareness that my transference was coming up. But it's funny how psyche like deceives you. Like if psyche wants to protect you from something, you can really mute. It's like anyway, but I started getting these neurotic thoughts about my analyst that were like just not relevant. I was like, oh, I feel like she's judging me for not doing this. It's like, those were the beginnings of that wound coming up. For me, it's like rejection of the mother and persecution from the mother. And so I had these, oh, Jasmine's judging me. And that was not happening in the conversations with her or anything. But that's when, okay, that's the psychic complex starting to like activate. It's getting ready to come up to like reveal itself. Like, what's the information here? So if we have the awareness, that is to say, if we have that acknowledgement as a background, then we can at least maybe give ourselves a chance when we start, if some of these places do get touched and start to come up, that we can at least go, oh, this might be something. This might be something in myself coming up, or da 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 da. And in some cases, it can be true. Sometimes what you're feeling about a person might be true. But in my case, with my own analyst, it's like, okay, do I actually think she's a persecuting woman who's like fundamentally hating me as a person or like whatever? It's like, no, I don't, even though that feels so viscerally real right now, because that's the nature of how these complexes and archetypal energies get constellated in our psyches at these really deep levels.